All right. Every question is answered in 3 minutes or less on Tuesdays. We call this the lightning round. We do this for an hour, and then on Friday night usually, but as I said, this week, Saturday night, is the loquacious version for a couple of hours where we get into things more extensively. And if Scott ever fails to answer within 3 minutes, he gets the whip. Very, very painful. Let's start. Our first question is from Sergey, who claims to be with the TASS news agency in New York. I'm curious to know your thoughts on the outcome of the NATO summit in Vilnius. What are the signals to the Ukrainian leadership, and what does it mean for the ongoing conflict with Russia?
I think it's imperative to underscore the fact that the outcome of the conflict in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine is not dependent upon what happens in Vilnius. It depends on the Russian army and the Russian political leadership. They alone determine how and when this war ends. Right now, the Russian military is in the process of accomplishing demilitarization. The strategic defeat of the Ukrainian army is taking place as we speak, as this summit unfolds. And a political decision on how this conflict comes to an end, it has yet to be fully articulated by the Russian government. Perhaps because there's a tactic there to try and lure people to the negotiating table. I don't know, but what's happening in Vilnius right now, the NATO summit, today there's a temper tantrum thrown by none other than Volodymyr Zelensky. He's angry that he hasn't been given immediate membership into NATO. That NATO is discussing the potential of Ukrainian membership without inviting Ukraine to the table. See, Zelensky has been led to believe that he is the center of the universe. He is not. He has been led to believe that Ukraine is important in the eyes of NATO and the West. It is not. What we're seeing unfolding in Ukraine today, or in the fighting there, is basically the present-day manifestation of something that George Soros opined in 1993 in an article about the future of NATO. He said that the key for NATO is that it needs an enemy. That enemy will be Russia, but NATO can't fight Russia because there were too many body bags coming home, that NATO needs to find a source of Eastern European manpower upon which they can append NATO technology for the purpose of bringing pain to Russia. That's exactly what's happening. And Zelensky and the rest of Ukraine need to wake up to the fact that they're being sacrificed by NATO, by the West, that nobody cares about Ukraine. Ukraine will never be a member of NATO, ever, ever, ever. And Vilnius is just a manifestation of that reality. And maybe now that Zelensky understands this, maybe now that the Ukrainian military, who might have been holding out on the hope that of some sort of NATO intervention, now that the reality sinks in of their imminent demise, because all they will do is die if they continue this war, maybe the Ukrainians themselves will start to sue for peace.
Okay, Patinka is torn between watching this stream and going to see the documentary, but she's going to stick with this stream, I think, and then watch the doc later, because we are live. Say what you want about the NATO summit. At least they have their messaging in order. A very, very crystal clear, superb clarity, consistency. No aberrations whatsoever. Am I right, Inspector?
You are right. I mean, geez, you're rubbing it in my face, though, because apparently somebody disagrees with us. They think that NATO and the U.S. need to work on their messaging. I mean, one, NATO is a defensive alliance. But two, and this is straight from John Kirby today, the spokesperson for the White House, or for the National Security Council, Finland joining NATO now forces Russia to defend a longer border. Why would Russia have to worry about defending a border with an alliance that is exclusively defensive in nature? There's just no consistency with NATO, with Kirby, with the United States. NATO isn't a defensive alliance. It's an aggressive, offensive-oriented alliance that's in the business of regime change. And what's happening right now in this conflict with Russia is a failed effort at regime change in Moscow.
There you go, being logical again. Well, at least the Biden administration has its story straight on how the war is going.
So I will say, with respect to your first question, we believe the war has been a strategic failure for Ukraine. The secretary spoke to this in a speech he gave in Helsinki last month, I believe it was. What's that? So, I'm sorry. Excuse me. A strategic failure for Ukraine. Thank you for the correction. Which is I need more than one correction today. A strategic. This is the first time at the podium for a week. I'm apparently a little rusty.
Yeah, right, a little rusty. You've forgotten the script. You unfortunately, because you were rusty, you fell back on fact, and you're not allowed to have fact when you're at the podium. You got to make it up.
In the interest of time, we have to move on. But he said that 10 more times, so we'll show that later. Nick from Russia, according to an Interfax article, Putin met with Prigozhin and all the Wagner commanders. Doesn't look like Putin holds a lot of grudges and doesn't look like he believes Prigozhin committed treason. Looks like in the end it was a conflict between Prigozhin and Shoigu. Thoughts on this, considering this new data?
Well, Nick, with all due respect, first of all, Putin doesn't hold grudge. He's the leader of Russia. The leader of Russia doesn't hold a grudge. You should know that. You live in Russia. The leader of Russia leads. And the number one priority of the leader of Russia is to preserve the security of Russia, the Russian nation, the Russian people. So understand what he's doing by holding this meeting. Nothing has changed. He has not retracted any of the words. He was clear, Vladimir Putin, on the 24th of June, that Prigozhin and Wagner, anybody who participated in the military incursion onto Russian soil, threatening Moscow, committed treason. Stab in the back. He hasn't changed that. He did say that he would, work with the Wagner commanders who weren't part of this and offer them opportunities. But here's the thing. When you look at Wagner as an organization, and interestingly enough, the FSB raided Prigozhin's apartment or mansion and published a photograph of the founding document of Wagner. And one of the things that comes out of it is all disputes were resolved collegially. What Putin did is call Wagner in and hold them to their own rules collegially. Sit down at the table. I'm going to give you an opportunity to air your problems. What's your issues? Lay it all out on the table. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Lay it out. Let's get it on the table. Tell me what's going on and let's seek to resolve it. But when this meeting's over, it's over. Never to be talked about again. No more stuff. This is how a leader avoids a civil war. This is how a leader avoids armed insurrection. Wagner had achieved heroic status, legendary status in the psyche of many Russians, and they were a little concerned about what was going on. The best way to nip it, the old adage, when you're explaining, you're losing. Why does Putin have to go in front of the Russian people and explain why he's doing this, that, and the other thing? The best thing to do is just make the problem go away, which is exactly what it did. It's called leadership. Prigozhin's not getting a free bill of health. He's not getting a walk. They're still investigating him for corruption, and the FSB is looking into the reports that he was colluding with Western intelligence. The Wagner commanders who didn't go into Russia are going to be given opportunities. The other ones will be given different opportunities. Putin resolved this issue collegially. For all you blood-sucking, dictatorship-wanting people, sorry, he didn't put him up against the wall and shoot him. That's not how Putin works.
Okay. Let's move on to Ben Taher in Libya. How would you describe the Turkish decision to release the Azov leaders, and how do you see Turkish foreign policy in general?
Well, I mean, it's a betrayal of an agreement they made with Russia. There's no doubt about that. Turkish foreign policy in general is looking out for Turkish interests, plain and simple. Turkey is straddling the gap or between the West and Russia, and you can't be on one without insulting the other. And so basically, what Erdogan has done is moving. You have the Vilnius NATO summit. You have NATO desperate to be seen as expanding, so they can make the argument that Russia can't stop NATO expansion. Because the reality is Russia stopped NATO expansion in Ukraine. Ukraine ain't never going to be a member of NATO. So NATO desperately needs Sweden to become a member. Erdogan took advantage of this desperation. And he got, I believe he's going to get new F-16 fighters from the United States. He's going to get economic concessions from Sweden and the other, I don't know what John Pierce wants, but I should ignore these things. But
it's a lifelong quest. We're all trying to figure out, what does John Pierce want?
Just what does he want? But the point is, Erdogan's looking out for Turkey. You know, Russia has said that what happened with the Azov people is a betrayal, and that there will be repercussions. But Russia's also said that Turkey is a sovereign nation that is free to, you know, implement its foreign policy as it best sees fit, and that's what Turkey's doing. Took me by surprise. I mean, one moment Erdogan saying Sweden will not join NATO until Turkey joins the European Union, and I'm like, well, that means never, because they're never going to let you into the European Union. And then literally within hours, it's like, Sweden's joining. And I'm like, okay, so it's very hard to do analysis when leaders are flip-flopping like that. But I think what we can safely say is that Erdogan is looking out for Turkey's best interests. He needs Western economic intervention to help stabilize a lira that's collapsing, a Turkish economy that's ravaged by inflation. He needs this Western economic investment, and the only way he can do that is by appeasing the West, and that's what he's doing here.
All right. As we go on, we all continue to ponder that great philosophical question of the ages: what does John Pierce want? I think I sense a new T-shirt coming.
That might be a new T-shirt. What in the John Pierce is going on here?
Dmitry from Kamchatka, Russia. I used to drink Kamchatka vodka. I wonder if they still make that. Many sources accuse Russia of using cluster bombs in this conflict, but Russians claim they don't use them. Who lies? Did Russians use cluster bombs in this conflict or not?
I believe the evidence shows that early on, Russia did use some cluster munitions. There's video evidence to this effect, showing cluster munitions striking areas, and there's physical evidence. People have recovered the newer version of the cluster munitions that are contained in the 122 millimeter Grad rocket. Ukraine doesn't have this new version, so clearly Russia. But I would say that Russia is not has not widely incorporated the use of this, and that Russia has held off. Now, what Russian leaders are saying is, if Ukraine uses these cluster artillery shells, that Russia will be unshackled. That basically Russia will unleash hell on the Ukrainians, and it hasn't done so. Yes, look, Walker, you're right. They have used cluster munitions, but they've used them when they're militarily when there's a military necessity for it. Right now, Russia has not used. Look, if they were going to use cluster munitions, there's no better time to use it than trying to break up the Ukrainian attacks right now. But the Russians, you're not seeing videos of bomblets coming down and slaughtering everything. You see videos of precision strikes with artillery. If they use cluster munitions against Russia, I can guarantee you this: the Russians will unleash hell on the Ukrainians. And when you have a 10-to-1 artillery superiority, it's going to be 10 times the hell. And the cluster munitions for the Ukrainians aren't going to achieve anything. You're using them against dug-in troops. These are weapons that are designed to use against troops in the open, tanks in the open, massed vehicles. But when you're dug in, when you have uneven terrain, when you have terrain that's been softened by rain, when you have overhead bushes and trees, the cluster munition is not an effective munition. So the irony is, in supplying these weapons to Ukraine, we're actually making them in many instances weaker. Whereas if Russia uses cluster munitions, they'll be used against Ukrainian forces seeking to attack massed formations, massed troops. It'll be a slaughter.
Okay, the answer to your question, Valley, is no. We don't have Ann today, and we don't have her anymore at all on Tuesdays. She now has a full-time job during the day, so she'll still be with us for the evening podcast and also for the Sunday one. Let's take a voicemail message now. This is a question about Turkey and Syria.
Hello, Lord Jeff and Sir Scott. I love your show. My question is Turkey in northern Syria to steal her oil like we're doing? Could you help us understand the background behind Turkey's aggression towards Syria? Thanks a lot.
And before you answer, I just want to say to everybody, that is the way to leave a voicemail message. No long, boring speeches. Succinct. Make that your model. Go. And not only because you call me Lord Jeff, but because of your
I just want to let him know that this hurts, because if anybody deserves the title Star-Lord, it's me. Now, I know Chris Pratt has taken it for Guardians of the Galaxy and he's turned it into a thing and all that, but I am the original Star-Lord. And I'm very upset not only that Chris Pratt took it, but somebody else is giving you half that title. But that's okay. I'm an adult. I won't let my bitterness show through too much. Turkey and Syria. First of all, people need to understand that the Vilayet of Aleppo, which is the province of Aleppo and nearby, was considered to be Anatolia proper during the Ottoman Empire. And when the Ottoman Empire was dismembered at the end of World War I, the Turks, the Turkish Republic that emerged was unhappy about losing the Vilayet of Aleppo. They viewed that as part of Turkey proper, just like they're unhappy about losing Mosul in northern Iraq. They consider that to be part of Turkey as well. So the Turks have always had a grudge about, having the French come in and draw artificial lines on the map and steal part of what they believe to be historic Turkey and incorporating that into Syria. So there's that aspect of it. There's also in northern Syria, there's a tomb too, and I got a little mind glitch here, but it's a tomb that's very relevant. The Turkish soldiers have permanent military presence there to protect the tomb, and so there's that. There's a lot of historical and cultural linkage between these areas, and so when Assad and Erdogan had their falling out, Assad, the president of Syria, Erdogan, the president of Turkey, had their falling out around the time of Arab Spring and the crackdown on dissent in Syria. The Turks felt that this was a strategic opportunity not only to get rid of Bashar al-Assad's regime, but to right the historic wrong by absorbing Aleppo. It's not done about the oil. The oil is actually in a different part towards got to orient the map, north, south, east of Syria. That's where the United States is occupying. The Turks came in and moved in on Aleppo in Idlib province, and then they secured a buffer zone between Turkey and Syria to keep Kurdish rebels or Kurdish separatists from crossing in. And Turkey's main goal right now is related to security, to trying to weaken Kurdish separatists who are in Syria, working armed and trained by the United States, and also to continue to destabilize Bashar al-Assad. So they're starting to back away from that. Regime change is no longer realistic, and Turkey is looking for an out together with Russia and Iran. They're negotiating a way to come up with an acceptable security framework. But Turkey has invested heavily in these rebels, many of whom are affiliated with ISIS and Al Qaeda in Idlib. Ouch! And they don't want to create a situation where these rebels have nowhere to go but to Turkey. So
getting a little too loquacious there for a Tuesday.
It was a complicated question, Jeff.
I understand. So the loquacious version, as I mentioned earlier, will be on Saturday night this week. That would be July 15th at the usual time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That's episode 82. We will see you then, and we will get into that documentary and all sorts of stuff in great detail Saturday night. Maria Niziraki from London. Russia shows true friendship to their allies, but Erdogan seems dishonest and hostile as he does things that are very detrimental to Russia. He sold drones to Ukraine, agreed to let Finland join NATO, released Azov Nazi prisoners, and now is saying that Ukraine deserves to be in NATO. Some friend. Any ideas?
Well, listening to Mr. Peskov, who is the spokesperson of the Kremlin, discuss this, what he said is that Russia is aware of what's going on, meaning that I think Russia understands that Turkey is under a lot of pressure right now. That Turkey is, it can be neither fish nor fowl right now. It's a mixture of the two, and it's a very difficult position for Erdogan to be in. I think Russia is outraged about the Azov betrayal because there was no real reason to do that except to win over the friendship of Zelensky, because it was done when Zelensky. I gotta stop reading these things because it disrupts my 3 minutes.
I need to get that image out of my mind, by the way.
I know. I mean, even that image got me worried too. But yeah. But anyway, so now Turkey's in a difficult position. Erdogan, as I said, he's trying to do what's best for Turkey. So he has to make a lot of compromises, and that's what we're seeing right now. Compromise, and I think Russia understands this. This is why one of the things that Peskov said is this will not have any impact on Russia's strategic cooperation with Turkey in the area of the energy hub, which is very important for Russia. The cooperation on atomic energy, but it will have an impact, for instance, on the grain. The grain deal, which is expiring, and Turkey desperately wants a 3-month extension because Turkey makes a lot of money off of this, and Russia's like, we're not going to do that. And I think we also saw that Russia took the gloves off in Syria. Turkey had been giving safe haven to some of these anti-Syrian rebels on bases controlled by the Syrian army, and Russian aircraft are starting to bomb these bases. Russia hadn't done that for a while, not to irritate the Turks, but I think Russia at this point in time could care less if the Turks are irritated, given the betrayal of, especially about the Azov Nazis, literal Nazis, that were allowed to return to Ukraine.
Jonathan doesn't like this version of the show. Let the man talk, he says. Listen, the man has agreed to do this. This is an extra episode of Ask the Inspector, so we can.
Yeah, because Jonathan, just so you know, if we didn't do the abbreviated thing, I couldn't do a 2-hour loquacious version on a Tuesday. If we're going to do a 1-hour show and it's going to have any meaningful impact, I've got to. Jeff and I agreed to shorten the answers. I didn't agree to the whip. That's just because Jeff's a very mean person. But yeah.
Another philosophical question people have been pondering for ages is, what does Jonathan want? What would please Jonathan? Sesh from
me speaking more.
Yeah. Sesh from Mumbai, India. Right now, the only thing stopping Ukraine from being admitted to NATO is the ongoing conflict. Somehow, I feel Russia might be okay with a rump Ukraine joining NATO as long as the Russian-aligned parts of Ukraine get incorporated into Russia. Could this be a deal that Russia and NATO can live with?
No, Russia will never agree to any part of Ukraine joining NATO. Now, if you want to extrapolate this and say that in a post-conflict scenario where Ukraine has been ripped apart and Western Ukraine has been absorbed by Poland, then it's part of Poland, who's already a NATO member. So the issue is moot. But Ukraine as a nation will never, ever, ever be part of NATO. That just isn't going to happen. And there won't be a negotiation that allows this.
Jeff is very mean. Maybe
I agree. I agree.
Very, very mean. How about that?
He stole my Star-Lord title.
Let me fix that. Hang on a second. We're getting there. There we go. Always good to hear from SW in Oregon. And hang on, let me see if I can get rid of that comment there. Okay, it is now said that Ukraine has more active tanks than Russia after thousands of documented destroyed, damaged, or captured. Around 500 are now fighting for the enemy. Russian footage of Western heavy armor seldom shows catastrophic kills. Is Russia in trouble if Ukrainian armor can breach the lines?
There's a lot in that statement. Anybody's in trouble.
I had to
if,
reduce the size of the font to get all that in, by the way. I hope you appreciate that S.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
No, I'm talking to him, S.
Oh, I thought you were talking to me, S.
Oh, yeah, right.
S for star, as in Star Lord. But,
All right, I'm going to stop the clock and start it again, so you get full time to answer it. Go.
look, anybody's in trouble if enemy armor breaches the lines. Okay, so right off the bat, yeah, but they're not breaching the lines, are they? SW, they're not even close to breaching the lines. You can clearly, you've been reading BBC and other generated reports that NAFO is not a trustworthy source, and NAFO generated reports about the massive destruction of Russian equipment, catastrophic kills, loss, damage, and all that. Don't believe a word of it. The Ukrainians are the ones that are suffering catastrophic losses. The Ukrainians do not have more tanks. How could you have more tanks than Russia? How many tanks does Ukraine produce anymore? None. So they have to receive all their tanks from foreign sources. What happened to all those foreign supplied tanks that are being deployed on the front line? They're being destroyed. Meanwhile, Russia has overwhelming tank presence. They're not losing tanks in the numbers that the Ukrainians are. They're producing 100 plus modern tanks a month. I just don't know where you get your data. Your data is wrong. It's the other way around. It's the Ukrainians that are going to have problems when the Russians start piercing the Ukrainian defensive lines with their armor, and that's already happening in certain areas. The Russians have gone over to limited counteroffensives. They've advanced, several kilometers in areas. They're in danger of surrounding significant pockets of Ukrainian. The Ukrainians are in danger of getting surrounded. So I've said this all along. The Ukrainian army is on the verge of collapse. This war ends by the end of summer, early fall, because Ukrainians simply cannot sustain the level of conflict. The Russians still have 150 to 200,000 troops. They have not committed to the fight. Ukraine is in the process of burning through the 60,000 reserves that they had built up with NATO for the past 8 months. There's nothing left once those 60,000 are gone.
Next question comes from Tusenflute.